I came from the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers, and the Alliance is the national trade association for General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, Toyota, Mercedes, 12 auto manufacturers. And it was a great opportunity there. I was there for 7.5 years. I ran the state affairs program. Great opportunity to really learn the underlying transportation issues and to experience how a national trade association, what their role in an industry is, and how they can make an impact. I grew up in Detroit, so I'm a car guy and part of a family who has worked all over different aspects of the auto industry. So it's really neat for me in this job and in the last one to be part of the auto industry, having grown up around it, but be in a totally different element of it than my family. So transportation matters to me, and I think this opportunity to come into the natural gas vehicle market was very unique, and it was something that interested me a lot, because the way that we're going to get to where we need to be is going to be through innovation and telling our story about all of the positive aspects of natural gas as a transportation fuel. And so I spent, as I said, 7.5 years at the Alliance, and a lot of the stuff that I worked on for the auto industry was just trying to stop things. We're trying to stop things from happening, the impact the industry. And the good thing here is that we wear the white hats. We're trying to get things done. And in spite of setbacks that we get periodically as an industry, we've got to keep that momentum moving forward. What I want to do today is I've got a number of slides I'm going to run through, and I'll try to keep this moving at a good pace. But if I'm going too fast, don't hesitate to yell out at me. But I thought I'd tell you a little bit about NGV America and what our mission is and what we're about, our members and so on. Then tell you a little bit about the marketplace nationally. What are we seeing right now in terms of natural gas vehicles sales nationwide? We'll talk a little bit about state and federal policy, and then try to wrap it all up with just a couple quick things about what we can do together in a collaborative way to move the market. So to start off, NGV America. This is all pretty straightforward. We're the national trade association dedicated to the development of growing a profitable, sustainable market for natural gas vehicles. So in a nutshell, we want to help move the marketplace. NGV America represents the full value chain of the industry, including more than 200 companies, environmental and government organizations interested in promoting natural gas. What that means is that we've got everybody at our table. We've got the full value chain of the companies who are involved in the space. Many of you members that are here today, we've got everybody at our table, and I think that puts us in a unique position as an organization to help foster the marketplace. Our members produce, distribute, market natural gas and renewable natural gas across the country. They manufacture and service natural gas vehicles. They build the components and the equipment. They operate fleets. So that is just a way of saying that we have to articulate a value proposition that's pretty wide in terms of what our members are interested in promoting the marketplace. Who are our members? This is just a little bit of a snapshot. This is everyone on our board of directors and a few others here in Texas that operate in many markets around the country. As you can see, these are names you know, and some of the names in the room. We've got a very broad and diverse membership that totals around 215, 220 companies right now. In terms of our mission, so this is something we've come up with in the last few months. It's really defining the corners of our mission. What are we there for? It's advocacy efforts with state and federal policymakers to advance the marketplace and level the playing field with other transportation fuels. It's education and communications to be the most credible voice on natural gas vehicles. We serve as a forum for collaboration, discussion, and debate in the interest of developing common standards and best practices in the NGV marketplace. You know, not the most glamorous piece of the business and of what we do, but as an organization, and I'll talk more about this later, really important that we get this part right. And then finally, you know, I think the last one is something we are to some extent, but more importantly, we aspire to be, and that is the convening authority for the natural gas vehicle industry leaders to gather, discuss issues with peers, customers, technology experts, and thought leaders. And we do this in a number of ways. We try to bring the industry together. We have a convention that many of you have been to. We'll talk more about that later, but I think in the future we want to look for more forums where we can be the strategic catalyst for bringing leaders in the industry together to get things done. So let's talk about the marketplace. We do a survey every year at the beginning of the year. We've done it for the last 3 years. I shouldn't say every year. We've done it every year for the last 3. What we try to do, we talk to those that are building and selling vehicles, and we try to understand what happened in the marketplace. There's about 152,000 vehicles out there right now in the U.S. From our research. And as you can see, about half of that is on the light duty side. We'll talk more in a minute, but the other half of this is really where the business is growing. What happened in 2014? So from a sales and production standpoint in 2014, we had a lot of good news and some okay news, or not as great news. The entire marketplace sales totaled about 18,000 vehicles in 2014, and that was about a 6% drop compared to 2013, so year-over-year sales. The heavy-duty market segment grew about 30%. Medium duty grew 24%. Light duty market segment fell about 34%. So what's behind that as we look a little deeper? As many of you or all of you know, the refuse and transit markets continue to be strong. And particularly on the refuse side, I like to tell people we own that market now. All of those vehicles are headed in this direction. It's just a function of when that's going to happen. Same thing on transit. Transit continues to be strong. There's some dabbling with electric and some hybrid and so on, but it's extremely expensive, and we've seen a lot of cases where people that have made those choices are coming back to NGVs. Heavy duty side continues to also be strong. You look at these numbers over here on the right, heavy duty was up at a pretty good base, or a pretty good clip from 2013 to 2014. There were some analysts that predicted that number was going to be a lot more, but I think many of those goals from the discussions we've had with the manufacturers were unrealistic from the get-go. And as you'll see in a chart here in a little bit, the trend continues to be in the right direction. On the light duty side, what hurt us there was the drop-off in the exploration and production sales. We've had a big piece of that market have been F-150s or Silverados that have been converted and put into that marketplace, and that really there's been a lot of fall off in that over the last year. We also had some loading in the system that we saw some evidence of in 2013 and strong orders back in 2012. So I think in many ways that that combination of factors really accounted for this overall drop-off in sales. When you just look at the two medium duty and heavy duty segments, I won't go into these individually, but as you can see, this just gives you some perspective on what are those vehicles that are out on the road today, and where are those sort of broken down. There is not good data collection in this industry, and that is a challenge, and I think that's something that we want to work on as an organization going forward, is that a lot of these are estimates that we're making by talking with different people who are in these segments. But data collection and having credible data in the future is something that's very important. We start looking at some trends here, and this is what I referenced earlier. So you can see here on the left, when we do this modeling, we account for about 7,500 vehicles a year in attrition. There are transit buses that are being retired now, refuse not so much yet, a lot of light duty vehicles that are being retired, and so the modeling has shown pretty consistently about 7,500 vehicles per year. But when you look at the heavy duty again here, high fuel use, something that is really important to growing this industry, the trend is headed in the right direction. And I think even with the variety of things going on in the marketplace this year, when we see what we're at the end of this year in 2015, I think there's still some positive signals that we're still going to grow on this number. Many of you here are involved in infrastructure development, and I think we've got a lot of good news on this front still, and that is that these stations are still happening. We're up to about 1,600 now nationwide. That's both public and private. We've got a lot of stakeholders who are in this, a lot of folks that are moving this ball forward. When we do our survey every month, we're still seeing this 15 to 20 new stations per month growth. And I think that's a really positive signal to me that we're still headed in the right direction. I'd say that's probably the most important data point that I look at each month, is just to get a feeling for where this is headed, and we haven't seen any fall off here yet. So you take this combination of good news on the station side, we take the combination of good news on the numbers, and it illuminates a pretty positive picture for the story. Except for we've got that one problem, and that's that the elephant in the room of oil prices is sort of still with us. So let's talk about that for a minute. You've all seen this chart in one way or another. Crude oil prices, historically over the last 15 years, they bounce all over the place. And when we talk about our value proposition as a transportation fuel, and the economics and where we're headed, this is the chart that we should have at the ready, because it really helps tell our story. Oil prices are going to continue to bounce all over. Will this line all over here in 15, will it stay there, or how much longer? Who knows? We can't predict that. The geopolitical issues that are involved with this, everything else, but we know what history tells us is that this is going to continue to bounce around. This chart, this just gives you the trends according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, what their projections are for gasoline, diesel, and natural gas fuel prices over the long run. And as you can see, when you project these numbers out, the people who follow this stuff pretty closely believe that that we're on the right path, or at least in terms of the differential in prices. Again, these numbers can change, but they give us some backup here that we're headed in the right direction. And finally, this last graph. This is natural gas fuel supply at a snapshot over the last whatever this is, 1990 to 2012. If we had 13 and 14 on here too, those numbers would even be higher, but this is just meant to illustrate that we got a lot of natural gas. As the chairman said here a minute ago, we've got a lot of fuel in the ground and a lot of a bright future in terms of the abundance of supply. So what do these three graphs mean? What do we take away from them when we talk about oil prices? History shows the decline in world oil prices and the drop in gasoline and diesel prices are likely to be short-lived. How you define short-lived is hard to say, but we know that oil is going to increase. The price of oil is going to increase as world demand increases and as the economy rebounds. Diesel fuel is influenced by a variety of other factors that will keep upward pressure on prices for the long run. So when we talk to fleets and we're talking about converting from diesel to natural gas, that's always in the back of their mind. They know that there are just other elements in the marketplace that will cause diesel prices to be higher in the future. On a BTU basis, and there's lots of ways to calculate this, of course, but we're still a 3-to-1 price advantage over oil. And at the pump, you see this in sort of a variety of prices around the country, but our surveys still show that we've got about 75 cents to $1 lower than diesel. What that doesn't account for is the 50-cent federal credit. And so you tack the credit on, and that makes that even better. But the credit has its own problems, as many of you know, and we'll talk more about that in a couple slides ahead. Long-term stability and low prices for natural gas relative to oil are likely to remain for many years. Well-documented economic models that really bore that out. When you talk about the long-term nature of fleet asset management, it suggests that it's continued to be prudent and invest in transportation fuel portfolio diversification. When we talk to our fleet customers that have made the investment in the infrastructure, the trucks are ready, they're continuing down that road. They're going to benefit from the long-term price stability of natural gas for a long time. That's why they're continuing to march down this path. State and federal policymakers are likely to continue to promote fuel diversification in the economy. Even when we're frustrated in the Congress, even when we say, boy, they should be doing this or that to help the industry, they know that fuel diversification is important in terms of a long-term goal. And clearly, as we'll talk more, and as all of you know, there's a lot of that going on at the state level as well. So how do we know that all of these things, that these points are really true? I think it's just in the headlines. We've seen so many positive headlines this year when there's been all this glum and the elephant in the room thing and that oil is so bad. We're seeing a lot of progress and we're seeing a lot of new purchases. And where there's been the peaks and the valleys of the industry in the past, I think that the valley that we're in now is sustainable, and because the industry is strong. We're seeing these large fleet customers continuing to buy. We're seeing lots of good news as we move forward. So how do we keep this going? And again, as many of you know, and as the chairman talked about, the states are where the action is. This is where we're doing things, or where things are happening that are really helping the industry. State policies can put more NGVs on the road. When you look at which states have been leaders, far and away, Texas, you guys have done terrific work down here. Utah, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania. You could put Indiana on this list. You could probably put Louisiana on the list. These are states that have really done important things that have helped get more NGVs on the road. So when we look as an organization how we're going to prioritize our resources, our staff, our energies, our talent in the future, we're going to be shifting more to have a stronger presence in the states. And I think that part of that is targeting the states that we can promote and expand NGV policies. Some of that is just working more closely with the groups and states that are doing much of this work already, and being a resource and helping provide some of the leadership. But organizationally, we're going to be a catalyst for helping get more of these policies done in the states in 2016. This just gives you a little idea of, these are all states that in the last couple of years have done something related to promoting the industry. And I say promoting with a little bit of a caveat that there are a couple states there that have done some things that haven't helped in terms of motor fuel taxes. But again, it just demonstrates that this is not a quiet industry. There's a lot of things going on across America. We as an organization just need to be a better catalyst for putting some organization behind getting the right things done. When you talk about what states can do to promote natural gas vehicles, I think everyone here knows this list pretty well. Vehicle purchase grants, probably the number one thing. Tax incentives are good too. Fuel station grants or incentives, sales and use tax exemptions, motor fuel tax preferential or equal treatment. It's just making sure that we're on level ground there in some cases. HOV lane access where it exists, the method of sale, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but just making sure that the fuel is dispensed in the right unit that promotes the industry. Weight exemption on state roads, so the equipment that you put on a natural gas heavy-duty truck weighs more. Sometimes, in some cases, that has made the truck max out, so getting exemptions for the weight differential can be helpful. And then certainly getting the state to act as a market participant, getting states in the game with buying some of these vehicles. So what are some of the other things we're watching out for in the states? California, a low carbon fuel standard. This is a program that's been around for quite some time and is under review again right now. And the anti-fossil fuel forces, if there are such a thing, are working hard to raise the carbon intensity numbers associated with natural gas. And so we're working in a coalition effort to stop that, because the modeling that they're using is unfair. It's based on old numbers, but the implications for this are wide-reaching for the rest of the industry. If California is allowed to do this, then it sets sort of a new bar in terms of how we're looking at carbon intensity with natural gas as a fuel. And when we look at fleet customers that are using this as part of their sustainability goals and other things, it's really important that we stay on top of this. So we're very involved in this in California right now. The DGE is a unit of sale for LNG. Currently there's no national standard for this. We're working with the National Council of Weights National Conference of Weights and Measures to have this adopted nationally. It's been a bit of a long road. In fact, we've had some states that have gone forward and just done this. We've had to do it through legislation. But again, it's providing some consistency so that those that are jumping into the game sort of have some predictability in this piece of that business. And then just the environmental groups with the anti-carbon agenda. You know, we're seeing some of the anti-fracking groups in some states where we're getting some of that blowback. So we're just, you know, from a perspective of watching these things in the states, these are things that we're looking closely at. This is a little bit of a clunky slide, but it's just to give you a snapshot of what's happened in the states. You look at 2014 and 2015, and you look at what's been passed and proposed, and sort of these top line areas of you know, pieces of legislation that have helped the industry. It's really just meant to illustrate that there's been a lot going on. And it's back to my earlier point that I think that we, NGV America, can provide a little bit more leadership and catalyst in getting these things done and organizing them in a way so that we can, you know, we can move the ball forward in many of these states. So Washington, we talked a lot about the states, but Washington still matters. And we've got a fairly lengthy agenda in DC right now. The extension of the fuel and infrastructure tax credits, the 50 cents and the 30,000 on stations. Congress is dysfunctional. It's not working, and they're taking the same approach when you look at how they're applying this fuel credit for us. Because for the last 2 cycles, at the end of the year, they shove this through with a bunch of other business tax credits, and it becomes a refund scheme for those that have already made the investment here, and it does nothing to promote the industry on a forward-looking basis. So our opinion is that when it comes to these credits, that they ought to be 5 years looking forward, and that Congress ought to pass them and give you 5 years then to really help grow the marketplace. And that's the goal of the program. That's what it was originally intended to do. But this is a challenge. And the main problem is that these are wrapped up in larger other business tax credits that get moved forward at the end of the year. And so while we've had a lot of meetings on this, while we get a lot of heads that nod and say, we understand your point, and pat us on the back as we walk out the door, you know, I have to say that I don't have a lot of optimism for how this is going to be changed. But I will say that this will continue to be one of our priorities. Fixing the LNG diesel tax penalty. LNG is taxed on a volumetric basis in terms of the federal road tax. Well, as you may know, there's a little bit difference in the BTU content between LNG and diesel fuel. So that means that LNG is being taxed at 1.7 times on a BTU content of that of diesel fuel. So we have one of our large members who has a lot of trucks running all over the road, and they're buying these vehicles. And just the amount of money that they have to pay on this differential between the LNG, cost of the LNG tax credit versus diesel, would, over the lifetime of the truck, would make up the difference of that incremental cost of the natural gas truck being larger, or being more expensive. So again, this is just kind of a goofy problem in the law that the Congress needs to address. We've probably made more progress on this year, I would say, than we have in the past. It's been around as an issue for quite some time, but I'm very optimistic that we might actually get this done this year. These other ones, reducing the incremental FET on heavy-duty vehicles. I won't go into this too much, but it's just, again, it's back to natural gas trucks cost more, so we don't think that the FET ought to apply on that incremental cost. In terms of the weight waiver, it's a little bit of the same thing that we're trying to do in the states. It's just to say that if you go over the 80,000 pounds allowed on federal roads, that you get an exemption for another couple thousand pounds of the fueling equipment. And that way that you're on a level playing field in terms of the load in the back of competing with diesel trucks. We've worked on appropriations for natural gas vehicle research, development, and deployment. If we had another hour, I could go into that in more detail, but it's a complicated issue, but it's something that's on our agenda and that we're working on. Same for the Clean Cities program. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Clean Cities programs around the country. Probably no other program other than maybe the CMAQ money has done more to put more vehicles on the road. So we've been strongly pushing to get more money in the Clean Cities budget. And actually that's another area where I have some optimism around this year. In terms of vehicle incentives on the light and heavy duty trucks, I'd love to be able to say we could get a $10,000 tax credit at the federal level and kind of match what we've done in some of the states, but it's just not realistic in this environment, and I don't see an opportunity for that really in the near term. Just a couple other things in terms of what's going on in DC. So the phase 2, the EPA NHTSA greenhouse gas emission fuel efficiency standards. So I'll get into this a little bit, but not bore you with too much of the details. Basically, this is the second phase of the rulemaking that regulates heavy-duty and medium-duty trucks and their fuel efficiency. It's a multi-dimensional program in that it's both EPA and NHTSA. This is the way they harmonize their rulemaking. Their joint goals of the program are to increase fuel efficiency on trucks, reduce petroleum use, lower fuel costs for fleets, and fewer emissions. Well, guess what? We're already delivering all of those things, right? Natural gas vehicles are already delivering that. So our goal with this rulemaking that's coming is just to make sure that we don't do any harm. Make sure that the federal agencies don't go overboard. What we're worried about is certification testing. They could make this much more complicated. On low volume vehicles, as you can imagine, those costs are much higher, so we don't want new burdensome certification testing regulations. We're watching about this inclusion of upstream emissions. Methane emissions are a broader issue, and we just don't want that brought into fuel efficiency standards. And then the same on this GWP calculation. So this is the global warming potential. Some environmental groups believe that methane's global warming potential calculation ought to be much higher and have been arguing for EPA and NHTSA to use higher numbers in the regulation. And so we've been fighting that. And this rulemaking actually could come out any day now. Our goal in it is to try to say positive things about it because it is going to move forward. It's a long process yet, but it will move forward. And if we can address these issues, which I feel pretty good about, then we'll be in good shape. Just to go back to this slide real quick, EDF methane studies, I'm not going to go into that too much, but there have been many in the natural gas vehicle industry that have been cooperating with the Environmental Defense Fund and academia, and that's been to try to get a baseline that we all agree that a baseline for methane emissions is X, and we can make improvements from there. EDF has taken some turns around that we've had to respond to, but it's just an ongoing issue that we're really working on with the close collaboration here with the other national trade associations, AGA, ANGA, APGA, and of course the American Trucking Associations. One of my charges of coming into this position is really to strengthen our ties with these organizations, use our combined reach on these issues that impact the natural gas vehicle piece of the business and utilize them to help us with this, and I think we've been successful with that. I just put in here the presidential election, and that I think, again, it's a new opportunity for us to, as an organization, to really try to help make sure that natural gas as a transportation fuel is put into this debate. Skipping ahead here, communications, just real quick here. We as an organization put a lot of stuff on our website. So those of you who've used it in the past, I would encourage you to keep using it. We are doing some things now. We've got a project underway that we're going to strengthen some of these things as well from the communication side. So I think you'll see more from us in our website very soon. So technology code standards and best practices. I talked about this earlier, and I'll just touch on this in these final couple slides. What are the critical safety and technology issues in the industry? Tank safety, of course, fire marshal training, maintenance facility codes and standards, gas quality, home refueling, modern fuel station monitoring, and a whole host of other things. We as an association, while the legislative things keep going around and we're very active in those and we're trying to use those to get more vehicles on the road, this is sort of the backbone of the industry that needs to be paid attention to as well. And so this is something that we have in the past as an industry relied on the Clean Vehicle Education Foundation to do. And I don't know how many of you have come across Doug Horn and John Dimmick who've run that. They're retiring. And so our board decided that we should pull that expertise and that backbone of what is so important to the industry back into NGV America. And we're in the process of doing that now. We're going to add a position that can really manage this for us. And then really, as this says here, just make sure that we provide leadership in this really critical area. So how do we kind of wrap all this up in sort of the road ahead? I have not been here, my 7.5 or 8 months I haven't been around long enough to, get here and sort of preach to you and say that these are the 10 things we have to do, and if we do these things, the industry is going to grow. But these are just some of my observations, and that is that we've got a great value proposition. We've got great things to still talk about on economics, on the environmental benefits, energy security, and the abundance. These are things that can't be argued the other way or hard to argue the other way. So we just have to collectively continue to trumpet these benefits and use credible data to back them up. We get a lot of environmental benefits numbers that kind of bounce around the industry sometimes. So I think one of the things we're trying to do is let's just make sure that we're all singing from the same song sheet and use NGV America to be able to project this is what we all ought to be saying when we talk about the benefits of us as a transportation fuel. States have got to continue to lead the way. We've talked a lot about that. Incentives, fuel taxes, CMAQ money. We've got to keep pushing states to lead here, because that's what's going to result in more NGVs on the road in the near term. Infrastructure development is critical. This is what is eventually going to help. If we can light a fire on the light duty market, that's eventually what's going to help us, if we can keep the infrastructure development moving. Innovation and technology, we've got great things coming here that are going to really help with the market. Low NOx engines, zero NOx engines, conformable tanks, maybe home refueling. I've seen some really neat things, not on home refueling, but some really neat things that are coming on tanks. But again, it's innovation and technology. This has got to lead the way for us. And then, I think it'd be great if we could get the OEMs to elevate their approach to a light duty product offering. The good news is there's more light duty product offerings than ever before. The bad news is what we really need is a purpose-built offering with a company that is willing to kind of do what Toyota did with the Prius and go out there and know that it's going to take 10 years to get to 1 million units in sales, but put the strong marketing behind it in the pressure that one of these OEMs can do. And then finally, it's just the collaborative efforts across the value chain. It's doing what Chairman Porter's doing. It's doing what you're all doing every day and talking to customers. We just got to keep collaborating together here as an industry to try to move the market forward. One of the things that we do to move the market forward is our conference in Denver. Many of you have been to this before. We did it in Kansas City last year. The year before last, it was in Atlanta. This is coming up September 15th to 17th. It's the only natural gas dedicated conference out there. We've got an expo that's part of this. We've got a lot of great programs. We've got more. I've got an all-day meeting on this tomorrow, so we've got a lot of things that are really coming together for this. So I just want to flag it because I think it'd be great to, if you're interested in how we can continue to collaborate together, this is a place where we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it. So that's just sort of a wrap-up. I hope I didn't burn through this stuff too fast and kept the major elements of this interesting.